Okay, moving right along to story number 2, which is actually a smashing together of two independent occurrences, but they were all done by the same person. So I have stitched them Frankenstein-like together, although it's not, it's not disparate pieces put together. There is a rhyme and a reason to the madness this time, because they both have to do with Nikole Hannah Jones, whom we've talked about before. She was the brains and the editor behind the 1619 Project, which just won a Pulitzer Prize. We talked about that here on the Rolling Stone a few weeks ago. Well, she did this past week two things. She said two things, okay? The first thing that she did had to do with the Second Amendment, because she pointed out, or she said, it wasn't really anything odd, but when Trump finally made his remarks regarding the riots in the White House Rose Garden, he also made mention to the Second Amendment, that we were going to protect the Second Amendment. Nikole Hannah Jones took to Twitter and said, well, it's really odd why he would talk about the Second Amendment in this context. Oh, until you realize that the Second Amendment was only put into the Constitution so that white slave owners could arm slave patrols. White slave owners could arm slave patrols. So basically what her whole point was, the Second Amendment is racist. So Trump mentioning the Second Amendment in his speech is actually a racist dog whistle to all of his supporters and to white Americans. Now, in the first place, this makes absolutely no damn sense. Even if this was true, and it's not, but even if this was true, how could this be a dog whistle? By its very definition, a dog whistle is a code that someone says, right? It seems innocuous, it seems innocent, but people who are in the know, hint hint, wink wink, nudge nudge, they know, oh, he said this, but really it means this. How can you have a dog whistle concerning something that's in the Constitution when nobody actually knows about the Constitution? I've mentioned before, recently, several times, that the nation's report card, its numbers came out. American students only have a 15% proficiency rate in American history, okay? Most schools do not have mandatory civics classes, okay? I forget when I read this, but most Americans do not know the rights that are all guaranteed and protected by the First Amendment. So how are they going to know? How is anybody going to know that the Second Amendment is a racist dog whistle based on its history? They're not going to. Again, even if what she said was true, there wouldn't be enough people educated about it to understand that it was a dog whistle. Okay? Trump might as well have been talking to a brick wall for all the good that it was going to be doing. So that's the first point. The second point is, like I said, if what she said here was true, and it is not even close. Her whole argument that the only reason why the Second Amendment was put in the Constitution is so that slave owners could arm slave patrols is a pack of lies. And it's a pack of lies for a couple of reasons. First, she ignores the fact that the right to bear arms, the right to have weapons, to own weapons, is a right that is consistently seen in the English common law, okay? Throughout English history, people were understood to have the right to own weapons, because you never knew when the king or when the lord who owned the land that you were on, we're talking about early Middle Ages here, the early medieval period onward, you never knew when one of them was going to call you up for war, to quell a rebellion, to stop an invasion, to prepare for an invasion, etc., etc. And this goes, again, like I said, this goes to some of the earliest parts of English history after the Norman invasion of 1066. Henry the First, for example, who ruled at the beginning of the 12th century, he made it a law that all men had to keep arms, weapons like spears, in their homes in case they were called to war. And the right extended from there all throughout British history. In fact, did you know that the English Bill of Rights of 1689, which was enacted by Parliament after the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when Parliament basically kicked James II off the throne and offered it to his daughter Mary and her husband William, who was the Prince of Orange, which was a principality in the Netherlands. Okay, we're not going to get into all the reasons why that happened. Suffice to say, in 1688, there is a bloodless revolution. Parliament offers William and Mary the throne. They say yes. They come over. James II sees that he has no support from everyone and flees the country to France. The next year, in 1689, Parliament enacts the English Bill of Rights, which is supposed to act as a check against the king's power. The days of the king being supreme in England were done. Now the king would only be supreme in Parliament. The king supreme in Parliament was the new normal. And one of the rights that was guaranteed by the Bill of Rights of 1689 was the freedom to bear arms for self-defense as an Englishman. That was really, really important, because the whole point of the Glorious Revolution of 1688 was that James II, if he wasn't a tyrant, he had been on the verge of becoming a tyrant. And therefore, it behooved all loyal, patriotic Englishmen to have arms, to act as a final check against would-be tyrants. And guess what? That history, that mentality, was transplanted to the New World, to the North American continent, with the English colonists. Okay? Slavery didn't have anything to do with it. That's the first point. The second point is that her, absurd simplification of history, it ignores the philosophy of the time. John Locke, Adam Smith, William Blackstone, who was a famous legalist of the early 18th century, they all linked the right to life. Okay, one of those pesky inalienable rights that Jefferson mentions in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, right? They linked John Locke, Adam Smith, William Blackstone, and other philosophers, other thinkers. They all linked the inalienable right to life with the right of self-defense, okay? And that's just common sense. That's just common sense, because if the right to life is inalienable, if no one can come and take it away except by legal means, again, talking about in the context of a criminal trial, where if, for example, you have murdered 10 people and therefore the death penalty is on the table, okay? In that circumstance, if the jury finds you guilty and if the jury condemns you to death, then yeah, that is an instance where the right to life can be justifiably taken away, okay? Because you have forfeited it by basically becoming an enemy to society. Okay? But that's one of the only few times when the right to life can be justly taken away. And again, it's important to note in the context, okay, in the legal context of keeping order, justice, and peace in society. And FYI, in the United States, the death penalty can actually only be suggested for the worst crimes of all, okay? If you go out and if you murder someone, chances are you're not going to even be looking at the death sentence. You have to have done something like you have to have raped someone repeatedly and then murdered them, or you have to have had gone on a murder spree, like a serial killer or something like that, okay? But outside of that context, the right to life is inalienable. No one can come and take it away from you. But how can you do that in the fallen world that we live in, right? Open your web browser, go to any news site, and you are going to see, this guy was a killer. He killed someone, or this guy raped someone, or this guy stole someone's property. This guy threatened this guy. You know what? There are constant threats to our life, to our property, to our well-being, that and of our family. So how can we actually preserve our right to life? Well, you can only do that in a fallen world if you actually have the right to self-defense. If you actually have an inalienable right as well to arm yourself in order to preserve your life and to preserve the lives of your family, of your friends, etc. Because the right to life would mean nothing. Okay? Let me back up for a second. And in our context, this has to mean that the right to bear arms includes guns. Because now guns are a common weapon. They are. It would be the height of ridiculousness to claim that you have an inalienable right to life, but that you do not have an inalienable right to the most common weapon that you could actually use to defend yourself. It makes absolutely no sense. People like John Locke, Adam Smith, and William Blackstone understood that. And the founders understood that as well. In fact, Roger Sherman, in the first federal Congress, so we're talking about the very first Congress that met after the Constitution was ratified by the states, and after George Washington has been inaugurated as the first president under the Constitution, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, he conceived it to be the privilege of every citizen and one of his most essential rights to bear arms and to resist every attack upon his liberty or property by whomsoever made. The particular states, like private citizens, have a right to be armed and to defend by force of arms their rights when invaded. So basically, he's saying that the Second Amendment, because, as you know, there's this huge debate right now that's been going on now for decades. The Second Amendment, does it give individual people the right to bear arms, or is it only talking about militias, in which case your right to bear arms is severely limited? You can only own arms if you are part of a well-regulated militia. Roger Sherman says, no, it's talking about both, because he says the particular states, like private citizens, have a right to be armed and to defend by force of arms their rights when invaded. And the third reason why this is bogus, why Nikole Hannah Jones's assertion that the Second Amendment is racist, the third reason why that is bogus is that it ignores our own history. Because think about it in this context. Americans have just gotten through fighting a revolution where they were fighting what they believed was a tyrannical government in London. A tyrannical king, a tyrannical parliament, a tyrannical bureaucracy, etc., etc., etc. And in many respects, it was becoming that way. Okay? The rights of Englishmen, the traditional rights of Englishmen, which Parliament and the king were supposed to defend, were being nullified. They were being ignored in the colonies by royal officials, by royal troops. Okay? So the entire point of the revolution is to correct the imbalance. We have a tradition of liberty and rights. The king and parliament, they're supposed to protect it. They aren't. We have a revolution to correct the balance so that liberty and rights can be protected within an ordered, just, and peaceful society. It's one of the reasons why the revolution was fought. Now, in that context, why would the only thought to guaranteeing the people the right to bear arms to protect their liberty and their property and their families, why in that context would the only thought be, you know what? We need to make sure that southern plantation owners can arm slave patrols. That's what we really have to think about. That's really what we have to protect. It makes absolutely no sense. But that's the only way. I am beginning to be of the opinion that Nikole Hannah Jones cannot see history in any other way because she is so ideological that she can only see history through this narrow peephole. She has to squeeze everything through this filter of slavery and racism. Damn with the actual facts, damn with the history, damn with the philosophy. It has to be this way. Because that's the only thing that she can see. That's the only way in her mind that it can make sense. Now, she's 100% wrong. And that's not justification in any way, shape, or form of what she's doing. But I'm beginning to think that she's actually even incapable of opening up her mind to anything else. And again, not to belabor an already belabored point, because we've talked about this before. When Gordon Wood, the preeminent living historian about the American Revolution and the early Republic, when he was interviewed by the World Socialist Network, the World Socialist website, last year in November, regarding the 1619 Project, he said that the abolitionist movement began in New England, in the northern states, after the American Revolution. That the American Revolution is actually what started this movement to end slavery. It makes absolutely no sense then why the Second Amendment would have only been added so that plantation owners could arm slave patrols. Makes absolutely no sense because it didn't happen. This is an ideological point that Jones was making, not a historical point. Now, the second thing that Jones did, she was on CBS News. She was interviewed by CBS News, where she actually said that these protests, okay, not riots, protests, as she put it, they're just about democracy. First, she said that the destruction of property isn't violence. She actually said that. She said the destruction of property isn't violence. And then when people actually quoted her verbatim, when conservative websites like the Washington Examiner, Breitbart, the Daily Wire, and others actually quoted her from her interview, where she said that the destruction of property, it's nothing that anybody really likes, it's nothing that anybody condones, but it's not really violence because, the things that are being destroyed, they're just things. They're not human lives, which again is really funny considering how progressives and people on the left will defend to the death the right of a mother to abort her baby, really for any reason whatsoever. Something else that we have gone over several times before. But when people started quoting her, she immediately turned around and said, well, people are just trying to silence me. They're trying to intimidate me. They're trying to intimidate a black journalist and a black writer, a black female writer. And this is just intimidation tactics. But it's not going to work. Okay, well, first of all, that's just bogus because she did say that. She did say that, gang. And I will actually link to, I will put the link to the Daily Wire story in the description box. I unfortunately cannot put the link to that particular tweet and to that particular interview where she had, or to that particular tweet, because she has blocked me on Twitter. She did that last December because I raised some sort of point about the 1619 Project, and her instant response was to block me. Okay. So, that's ridiculous. When you say something, at least have the guts and the brass to stand by it. Don't try to weasel out of what you said by claiming that everybody who's just quoting your words are racist and they're just proving their racism and they're trying to intimidate you because you're black. Spare me that. But let's look at her other assertion that the protests, the looting and the riots and the burning and everything, well, nobody condones them. They're just, those people are just fighting for democracy. for all Americans, she was quick to point out. They're fighting for democracy for all Americans. See that? They're just fighting for democracy. For you and us, they're fighting so that we can actually participate in democracy. Like these people like Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo said on CNN, these people are just like the American revolutionaries. Wrong. Burning stores, setting police cars on fire, smashing windows on cars that belong to private citizens when those people are still in them, looting and robbing, and now killing people who are trying to stop these protests, these riots, like what happened to 77-year-old retired police captain David Dorn in St. Louis, Missouri. Okay? A black man, by the way, though that's neither here nor there. He saw a looting taking place. He tried to stop it. He was shot in the back of the head, dead, for his pain and for his trouble. All of these things are the antithesis of democracy. Because what is democracy? It is the rule of the people, right? That's literally what the word means. How can the people rule when there is violence in the streets? How can the people rule when there is no order? How can the people rule when the social order of our country has dissolved to the point where we can't even talk to each other? Where, again, if you tweet out all lives matter, you're fired from your job. You lose your livelihood. How can we actually argue? How can we debate? How can we reason in that sort of environment as has been created with these riots in the past week? You can't. It's impossible. What is happening right now makes it impossible for the people to rule. What we have instead is mobocracy. We have mob rule. We have the corruption of democracy out there. That's what's burning the cities. That's not democracy in action. That's the corruption of democracy. That's the first point. Okay? So, they're not fighting for democracy. They're fighting for their own empowerment. That's what's going on. And this second point, to get a little bit more specific, where she said, well, they're just fighting for democracy for all of us. Bogus. If you watched our regular On the Stone video that was posted on Wednesday, mea culpa, you will know that I quoted Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton. They are the authors of the book Black Power that was published in 1967. And in that book, Carmichael and Hamilton make a point to say that no matter how liberal a white person becomes, to put it in today's jargon, no matter how much a white person tries to be a good ally to people of color, to black people, to minorities, etc., they will never, ever, ever exceed, because the very fact of their whiteness prevents them from actually being a good ally. Or as sociologist James Lindsay has put it, there is no such thing, according to intersectionality, there is no such thing as a good, positive, white identity. Now, Nikole Hannah Jones knows this. She knows intersectionality. She knows what it preaches. The 1619 Project is the incarnation of intersectionality. It is the enforcing of intersectionality upon our own history. So she knows this. So she also knows what intersectionality preaches about white identity and about the impossibility, according to its own rules, of white people actually becoming allies of minority people. Because the very fact of being white means that you are oppressing minority people. You don't even realize it. Just the mere fact of being white makes you an oppressor. So how in the hell could these protesters be fighting for democracy for white people? You can't. It's a lie. And it's a lie deliberately fashioned to try and get people on her side. Oh, it's just a popular uprising for democracy for everyone. Yes. Sure. Yeah. You get everyone on your side. And then you turn on them. That was actually the same trick that Cortez used, by the way. Hernando Cortez who took on the Aztec Empire. One of the reasons why he was able to succeed is that he got all the neighboring tribes in Mexico to join him because they didn't want to be bullied by the Aztecs anymore and used as their sacrifices on top of their pyramids. As soon as Cortez actually took Tenochtitlan, modern-day Mexico City, as soon as that was done, guess what? All of our Indian allies who helped us overthrow the Aztecs, turn in your weapons. Come on, come on, come on. We're in charge now. That's the same thing here. Spiel off a nice platitude about democracy for everyone. Get people who are laden with guilt on your side, thinking naively that this time finally they will finally atone for the horrible sin of white oppression and white supremacy and white privilege. And then as soon as you succeed, the bar goes higher and they find out that they have just been used and that no, there is no forgiveness, there is no absolution because you are white. And according to intersectionality, if you are white, then there is no forgiveness. There is nothing except perpetual penance, which means being at the bottom of the totem pole in the new pigmentocracy. That is what Nikole Hannah Jones was arguing for, and that is story number 2.